All right, the U.S. government, look, we all know it can be a force for good. It can do things like bring humanitarian aid to hurting nations, defend religious liberties, religious freedom throughout the world, these type of things. But under the Biden administration, a relentless push of the LGBT agenda literally overrides humanitarian principles at every turn. Earlier this month, the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, released its LGBTQI plus inclusive development policy, which will reallocate resources from the organization's stated mission in favor of pushing radical gender ideology.
I am proud to launch USAID's first ever lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex inclusive development policy. The policy is a blueprint for USAID staff and partners around the world to champion LGBTQI+ inclusive development and the human rights of all LGBTQI+ people through our work.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, here we have you said senior LGBTQI plus coordinator. Did you hear what all that was? The lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, inclusion, develop. I mean, where are we going with all of this? And what is the impact of this type of policy being pushed on our foreign policy? Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Arielle Del Turco. She's the director of the Center for Religious Liberty here at FRC. Arielle, thank you for joining us here on Washington Watch. Good to have you.
Thank you for having me, Jody.
All right, so what is the stated mission? Why don't we start here? What is the stated mission of USAID, and how does this new policy really lead them to take their eye off the ball?
Yeah, so USAID, it's primarily responsible for exporting most of the United States foreign assistance, which is, of course, funded by taxpayers. So they're supposed to be doing things like saving lives, providing food aid, providing humanitarian relief after natural disasters, things like that, which we can all agree on that are important, that are a force for good, as you said in your introduction. Sadly, the Biden administration has completely hijacked this agency, and they're treating it now like an activist organization. The new USAID LGBT policy that you mentioned in your introduction, it basically reads like an activist handbook. And frankly, I think that's what USAID thinks that they are. They think they're an activist organization. That's how they act. And their number one priority might not be the development assistance that we think it should be. It might actually be this LGBT expansionism around the world.
I think that's an excellent way of putting it. They really have become an activist agency pushing this LGBT type policy around the world. And obviously, Arielle, that has to impact our relationship with needy nations, quite frankly, that we are trying to help, and that this agency is designed to help. Can you unpack some of the harm that comes from this type of transition in an agency to push radical ideology?
Absolutely. Well, many of the countries that USAID is focused on helping, they're poorer, they're often more culturally conservative, they're often more religious, so they're not as keen on the LGBT ideology that Western elites are so invested in pushing around the world. And so there's a real conflict there when for example, recently the Biden administration threatened to withhold PEPFAR funds, which is supposed to go to supporting AIDS patients in Africa. They threatened Uganda to remove all of their PEPFAR funds, remove their AIDS funding because of a bill that they passed that they didn't see as pro-LGBT. So they're really being coercive here, and that's going to have a real problem when we're looking at China coming to these countries offering aid and they don't have the same strings attached. How are African countries going to feel is their friend? Are they going to look to the Biden administration who's pushing these ideologies down their throats, or are they going to look to China who's willing to hand out money for free?
Yeah, and this obviously, to me, not only hurts those countries that were designed here to help, but it impacts what other countries are seeing the United States push as well. Listen, ultimately, is it fair to say that this policy from the Biden administration is actively harming our international diplomacy?
Yeah, the Biden administration, sadly, with debacles like Afghanistan, Ukraine, how the Biden administration is handling China or failing to counter it, they've proven themselves completely untrustworthy with the weight and responsibility of American diplomacy. They are in charge of the most powerful country in the world, and they're not acting like it at all. They're spending all of their resources, all of their focus on these political agendas, specifically on abortion, on climate change, on LGBT ideologies. And frankly, it's not just bad for the rest of the world, it's bad for the United States as well. It's not good for our spiritual health that we are exporting this filth around the world and suffering with it as home as well.
Arielle Del Turco, thank you so much for keeping us up to speed on something that the legacy media totally ignores.